All right, welcome back to the A-Side, B-Side podcast. What's going on, Adam?
Not too much, just surviving and figuring out what's happening in life.
Yeah, of course, as of recording this podcast, the world is on hold because we have no idea who our next president is going to be at the moment. So it's been a weird, wild, stressful couple of days.
So I told my kids this yesterday, and I didn't actually listen to it when I said it out loud, but when the second presidential election ever happened in the US, George Washington had to wait 2 months to find out if he won.
True.
So 2 days shouldn't feel that bad, but also it feels excruciating and horrible because, like, this isn't 1781. This isn't where, like, you literally had to cast the ballots and then some dude got on a horse or dudette, but because of misogyny, it was probably a dude who got on a horse and then rode to the Capitol to say, hey, here's how my friends voted. We are so spoiled by the fact that we can get everything, we get results so quick.
Mm-hmm.
Like when we go to get a COVID test right now, people are annoyed that it takes 48 hours or 6 days, depending on what kind of test you get. But
Right.
that's how privileged we are, that we get results really quick. And this election is not going to be quick.
No, we might not know the results until after our podcast has already been posted. So the only thing we can
Yeah.
do is just, keep going.
I had to show my kids like Google photos of the folks looking at the hanging chads in 2000.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were like, has this ever happened before? I'm like, well, yeah, kind of, but in a really weird way.
Yeah.
We had people with magnifying glasses, depending, like looking at ballots saying, did they push hard enough for this to be a real vote? So we made it through that. And it wasn't like, I'm not saying it was perfect, but we made it through. We'll make it through this. But yeah, my kids were looking at the photos on Google where it's got like these guys with giant magnifying glasses looking at punch cards. And they're like, this is how we picked the president? I'm like, yeah, it kind of was. So.
Well, aside from the election, I've been watching on Stars. I think I talked about it last week. No, I don't think I did talk about it last week because we just kind of jumped into the A side last week.
Yeah, because I just started talking and then all of a sudden I was doing my side. There was no transition. It was not smooth.
So I talked about The Vow, which is on HBO, but now Stars has another version of the show about NXIVM, and it's from people on the inside, like the girls or some of the women that were actually in the cult itself, the sex cult part of it. And I mean, I'm telling you, like, HBO is PBS compared to this. They are graphic. I mean, and it's good and it's informative, but it is graphic, and that Keith Raniere deserved every single one of those 120 years that he received. And I'm interested to see what happens with the actress Allison Mack.
That's how I first heard about it, because she was famous enough that I knew her name.
Mm-hmm.
And then the news stories started talking about, oh, here's this Hollywood actress involved in this potential nefarious business, which is also the name of my emo rock band, Nefarious Business.
Ah, yeah.
If anybody wants to look that up.
But it's definitely worth a watch. It's not for the squeamish, because Keith Raniere is a sick, disgusting bastard. Yes, I said it, Mom. Sorry.
I mean, but you're not wrong.
No, he's as sick as they come.
Yeah, sometimes the truth can't get bleeped out.
So I went on to our app to see where people are listening. And I told you I was not sending you the list because you wanted to read all 5 pages of it. So
I'm just super excited that people are listening. And I also like saying the names of cities. It's a weird thing.
What's up to Tel Aviv in Israel? That's really cool. And North Sumatra, Indonesia. Tokyo, Japan. Hey. Romania, Hamburg, Germany. We got some hellos going out there. Also, Adam, I might be saying this wrong. Invergrove.
Oh yeah, in Grove Heights.
Invergrove. Secaucus. What's up, Secaucus? Sanford, North Carolina. Sabina, Ohio. Segoville, Texas. Garland, Texas. Newport News, Virginia. Valley Springs, California. And Beaufort, Georgia. Hey, y'all.
I love that you were like, tell me how to pronounce this, and it was Invergrove, and then you were just immediately into Secaucus. Like Secaucus is a very like that word would scare way more people than Invergrove.
But I'm from the north, so I know
I know.
Secaucus. That's me is like, oh yeah, that's the, I mean, so like back home, a lot of the names are like Tonawanda and Skajakwada and Chautauqua. So
I have my my Google Map set on the Australian lady because she's got a great voice, but she also doesn't know how to pronounce any Minnesota towns. So recently, I was driving south, and there's a town called Mankato in Minnesota, but my Google Maps lady was like Mankato, and I was like, yeah, that's cool. It sounds good. Well, I'll allow it.
Also, any sources that we talk about today in the podcast will be posted on our website. If you enjoy the show, we would love for you to go like it and rate it on Apple. You can follow us, subscribe on Apple, subscribe on Spotify. Also, you can support the podcast on Buy Me a Coffee. All of the money used is to keep the show going and for production and promotion of the podcast. So we would really, really love you. I mean, we love you anyway, but
and sometimes like that means just getting Brooke a coffee because she's doing all of the work of editing. So she needs all of the coffee.
I do need all of the coffee.
Like y'all hear our voices, but Brooke has to deal with my voice a lot more and then cut out most of it. So it's we should buy her a coffee.
Suck up. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, but it works.
Oh, all right. So I'm going to start first this week.
Yeah. Thank God, because I hate starting first. Because when I start first, we don't do any of this fun talking. I just start talking.
All right. So we're going to jump into the B-side here in just a second.
Have you ever thought to yourself, man, I sure would like to make a podcast. I've got so much to say about blank. Well, if you haven't heard about Anchor, you really should. It is the easiest way to make a podcast, and it's absolutely free. All right, I'm going to tell you why it's so easy. Okay, so with Anchor, there's creation tools that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many others. And you can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Trust me, I'm so excited about this. You can be too. Download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor FM to get started.
All right, so this week, real fast, I forgot to mention this earlier. New holiday merch launching on the website as of this podcast. So yay, there's some cool holiday stuff. Adam, I've even got something special for you on there. You want to see it, you're going to have to go look at it on the website. I'm not even going to tell you what it is.
Wow, tease.
Okay, so for this week's story, I posted a poll on our Instagram, on our Facebook. I sent it out to like friends and family to say, okay, which story should be this week's episode? And the choices were real life Hannibal the Cannibal, socialite slayer, and the internet's first killer. And overwhelmingly, the winner, the internet's first killer.
That's what I voted for.
So this week is the story of John Edward Robinson Sr., aka John Osborne, aka Slave Master.
Wow, that got dark right at the end.
He's known as the internet's first serial killer. He made contact with most of his post-93 victims via online chat rooms. So John Edward Robinson was born December 27th, 1943 in Chicago. He was the third in line of 5 kids. And we have seen a theme here. John had difficult parents. His father was an alcoholic, and his mom was absent a lot of the time. And when she was around, she was a really strict disciplinarian. John had a younger infant brother that he grew very attached to. Well, sadly, his brother fell ill and died, and his mother held him responsible for the death.
What?
Yeah, I don't know. So in 1957, at the age of 14, he became an Eagle Scout. He joined the Boy Scouts at the age of 14. Were you a Boy Scout or an Eagle Scout or anything?
I was not. My father was an Eagle Scout, and I had always been super interested in scouting. My dad would tell me stories about having to camp in the winter in Wisconsin. So I got less interested. Yeah.
Martin Smith, who writes about John Edward, he writes that John traveled to London with a group of scouts who performed for Queen Elizabeth II. He was actually chosen as the only American to represent and to lead 120 Boy Scouts at the Royal Command performance. So you're thinking, oh man, this is going to be a good story, a cool story.
Yeah. That sounds very positive so far.
Yeah, no, he devolves real quickly. So later
better.
Later that year, he enrolled in Quigley Prep Seminary in Chicago. It's a private boys' school for boys that are looking to become priests. But he was forced to leave after only 1 year because of disciplinary issues. Like I said, he devolves quickly.
Yeah.
So in 1961, John Edward enrolls at Morton Junior College in Cicero. He wants to become a medical x-ray technician, but he dropped out after 2 years. In 1964, at the age of 21, he moves to Kansas City, where he meets and marries Nancy Jo Lynch. So the reason that he left Cicero and moved to Kansas is he was accused of embezzling money from the hospital where he worked at in Chicago. Yeah. So John and Nancy had their first child, John Jr., in 1965. And then they had fraternal twins, Christopher and Christine, in 1971. Well, during this time and between the births of his children in 1969, John gets arrested for the very first time. Why? You can probably guess. Embezzling. He took over $100,000 from his employer, which was Fountain Plaza X-ray Laboratory. In August of 1969, he was he was found guilty of embezzling $33,000 from the medical practice of Dr. Wallace Graham, where he had worked as an X-ray tech, a job that he got because he falsified credentials. Because remember, he didn't finish school. So he forged documents to become an X-ray tech, and now he's embezzling money from all these different places.
Dude loves other people's money.
Yeah. And you would think, oh, maybe it'll stop there, but no. So he received a suspended sentence and he got 3 years probation. And then in 1970, what did he go and do? He violated that probation. He moved back to Chicago without his probation officer's consent or knowledge, as a matter of fact. Like his probation officer had no idea that he had just packed up and moved. So the reason he moved back was for a job. You would think you would just call up the probation officer and be like, I need a job. They got this job for me. Here, can I go? And the probation officer would be like, yay or nay, probably yay, if it's going to make you a better person. But he didn't do any of that. So he moves back to Chicago to become an insurance salesman at R.B. Jones Company.
Well, to be fair, if he was going to be an insurance salesman, maybe the probation officer would have been like, I don't know about that.
That means sometimes they make good money, right?
Oh, they make good money. Yeah.
Yeah, well, whatever. Well, the arrests don't stop for John. They just keep on coming. In 1971, he's arrested again. Do you want to guess why?
Embezzlement?
Yeah, ding, 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 ding. You got it.
Look at me. I figure things out.
So the company that he moves to Chicago for and doesn't tell his probation officer about, he embezzles money from them, R.B. Jones.
I think we have reason he didn't tell probation officer about already.
Yeah. So he embezzled money from R.B. Jones and apparently had a couple little side jobs, and he embezzles money from these employers as well. So he gets found out and he's ordered to move back to Kansas, where he sets up his own business, but he continues to forge documents. Forging and embezzlement. Oh man, if only that's where he stopped. So
the guy is consistent, if nothing else.
I mean, you can plan on him embezzling some money. Yeah. So in 1975, his probation was extended for a second time when he was arrested yet again on charges 4 counts of security fraud and mail fraud and false representation because he was caught, you guessed it, forging signatures and letters attempting to claim thousands of dollars through share scams. So this led to an investigation of his company by the SEC, which is the Security and Exchange Commission, which they are the ones that kind of look over all the businesses and making sure they're above board.
Mm.
So along with probation, John was fined $2,500. Now we go to 1977. John, in an effort to raise his public profile and cultivate an appearance of like being a respectable community family guy, you know, he wanted to be personable and be well liked. He became a scout master. You know, you remember he was an Eagle Scout as a kid, so he legitimately knows
Right.
what to do.
Yeah. It's not easy to be an Eagle Scout. That is very hard to do.
Plus, he had a son, so he becomes a scoutmaster. He becomes a baseball coach. He even becomes a Sunday school teacher. I mean, talk about putting it on, laying it on thick, right?
Mm-hmm.
He also talked his way onto the board of directors for a local charity. And then, doing what he does best, he forged a series of letters and documents from the charity's executive director to the mayor of Kansas City, then from the mayor to other civic leaders, all commending John on his wonderful volunteer efforts. Eventually, John gets himself an award. It's an award he invented. He gets himself an award. It's the first ever Man of the Year award. He's so into this that he even throws himself a festive luncheon in his own honor. And he tricked the senator at the time, Mary Gant, into not only attending this festive luncheon in his honor, but presenting him with a plaque for the Man of the Year award.
Damn.
Right. So now that his public profile is getting higher and he's getting these awards, and like a lot of times when someone's presented with an award, the newspaper does an article on it, right? So the Kansas,
as they should.
And it's a good thing they did. The Kansas City Star ran a story about the luncheon, and they got a bunch of complaints about it because people were selling them that they're like false reporting and they're giving out false information. So the paper is like, whoa, wait, we're just going with the info we've been giving. So they decide to investigate it.
They're like, hey, we got a press release.
Right. So Mac Edwards was the reporter that was assigned to investigate this whole plaque award luncheon fiasco. So as a result of this investigation, the Kansas City Star is forced to run another story exposing John Edwards and his lengthy criminal record, his embezzlement schemes, everything. Like, I don't understand how this dude didn't think by using his real name and doing all this stuff that people weren't going to be able to track down what he had done in the past.
Well, it was hubris, and it was the 70s.
True. Valid points. But think about investigative reporters in the 70s. I feel like that's when they were at their peak. Like they got a story and they just were like a dog with a bone. They didn't stop.
It's true. But then I'm guessing John from Kansas City didn't think he'd be getting the Woodward and Bernstein treatment.
I guess not, because he kept trying to embezzle from every place. So John Edwards completes his probation in 1979. Just in time to get arrested yet again in 1980. Yep. More embezzlement. Also check forgery and felony theft. Now, I know this is a true crime podcast and you're like, okay, but Brooke, where's the murder? Don't worry, it's coming. Oh boy, is it a coming? Okay.
The weird part is, like, I was not like that. I was like, this is nice. We're just talking about like white collar crime. Cool.
It's just a little embezzling, just a little check forging.
It's just a lot of embezzling. You know, it's cool.
So on
There's no blood in this episode. It's cool. I'm into this.
Oh no, it's on its way. So on December 30th I mean, come on, you know, there's got to be some blood.
I know. I mean, a guy with night terrors can hope, you know?
So on December 30th of 1980, he was fired yet again. He was an employee. He was the employee relations manager at Guy's Foods in Liberty, Missouri. He was ordered to pay back $50,000 to Guy's Food. On December 31st, he pled guilty to stealing a $6,000 check and he faced 7 years in prison. So he made a deal with the prosecutor and he served 60 days in jail and received another 5 years of probation. He served his jail time from May 8th, 60 days, which ended in July of 1982. Once John is released, he forms a bogus hydroponics business and is able to swindle $25,000 from a friend who had hoped to receive like a fast turnaround investment. Look, if it sounds too good to be true,
It's too good to be true.
It's too good to be true. Okay. So his friend was looking for some fast cash and, well, he got swindled because the friend actually wanted to use that money to pay for his wife's healthcare needs. His wife was really sick and he figured, okay, I can take this money and I can turn it around and, put it on her healthcare needs. But he's lost that money. So then John Edward begins inappropriately propositioning his neighbors' wives, not like one or two, but like a bunch of his neighbors' wives.
He was just like, shotgun effect. Like, just proposition everybody. We'll see what happens.
Right. So many so that he ends up getting into a fist fight with one of the husbands. He also joins a secret sadomasochism cult called the International Council of Masters, and he becomes its slave master.
Yeah, that sounds awful.
Right. So as the slave master, some of his duties include luring victims to the gatherings to be tortured. Okay, let me stop here, Adam. I'm just giving you a heads up. This is where we start to get a little bit more graphic.
Yeah. No, I've already half stopped listening.
All right. So, as the slave master, some of his duties include luring victims to the gatherings to be tortured and raped by cult members. Okay, this is where things start to connect, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So John Edward is sticking to doing what he knows best. He started a couple of fake shell companies, EquiPlus and Equi2. In 1984, John hired 19-year-old Paula Godfrey. He told her that she was going to be working as a sales rep for his fraudulent companies. 19 years old, and I remember being 19 and you're young and you're excited and you're full of trust. And, that's Paula. She told her family and her friends that John was sending her off to train. And according to the Charlie Project's page on Paula, her family members told authorities that John picked her up from her house on September 1st. He was supposed to drive her to the airport. And that was the last that Paula was ever heard from again. When Paula didn't reach out to her family for a few days, her father contacted the hotel that she was supposed to be staying at because like a girl does, like a good, I shouldn't say like a good girl. I know most women, if they're traveling out of town, you tell someone, here's where I'm staying, here's my information, here's how to get in touch with me. And that's what Paula did. Mm-hmm. So Paula's father contacted the hotel she was supposed to be staying at and found out that she never checked in. So Paula's parents contact the police and they file a missing persons report. The police, of course, question the last person known to see her, John Edward Robinson. He denied any knowledge of knowing where she could possibly be. Paula's family received a postmarked typewritten letter. It was postmarked from Kansas City. Several days after the report, it was supposedly from Paula. The letter said that it wanted to thank John for his help, and it stated that she was, quote, okay, and she wanted to start over. The letter was full of grammatical errors, typewritten errors, which her family said was extremely unrealistic for her. Mm-hmm. The letter also stated that she didn't want any contact with her family, which her family was like, yeah, right. Come on. No.
Like, no.
So even though her family and authorities believed it was a forgery without any proof of wrongdoing. And because Paula was of legal age, they were kind of stuck in a holding pattern. There's not much they could do. So the investigation was terminated. So in 1985, John was using the name John Osborne, and he met Lisa Stassi and her infant daughter, Tiffany, who was 4 months old at the time. John met Lisa and Tiffany at a battered women's shelter in Kansas City. John promised Lisa a job in Chicago. He also promised Lisa daycare help and a place to live. But what he had her do was sign some pieces of blank paper first, which I can only assume, being trusting and wanting to get out of the situation and wanting to do better for herself, she put her faith in this man who said he was going to help her. So that's why she signed blank pieces of paper. It's also the 70s. People thought very differently back then.
Mm-hmm.
Like now somebody is like, can you sign this? I'm like, what is it? They're like, it's a check. Nah, I mean, can I take it to the bank first? You know?
Yeah. Tell me more about this document.
Right. Well, we want to give you $1 million. Okay, but I need to verify that. So we're gonna go to the. Just people are different now, you know. So Lisa,
we don't trust like we used to.
No, and it's because of people like him. The 70s was full of a bunch of bad people. I'm telling you.
I mean, every decade is. It's just we find out about them later.
Yeah. So unfortunately, Lisa, just like Paula, vanishes. But police eventually learn that Tiffany, get this, Tiffany was illegally adopted by John's brother and sister-in-law, who'd been unable to adopt a baby through traditional channels. John told his brother that Tiffany's biological mother had taken her own life. Now, unbeknownst to them, they had no idea what happened to Lisa. They just know that here comes their brother with this baby, and he's, you know what he does? He forges documents.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he did. So Don and Helen Robinson paid $5,500 to an imaginary attorney, and they received Tiffany, thinking that this was a legal, valid adoption. They even had authentic looking adoption papers with forged signatures of 2 different attorneys and a judge. Talk about some serious forgery skills here.
Yeah, this guy was experienced and good at it.
Now, this was 1985. Tiffany's identity was confirmed through DNA testing in 2000. So she didn't find out until much later in life what happened. So in 1987, 27-year-old Catherine Clampett was hired by John as a secretary. The job required Catherine to travel for business on behalf of John. Okay, I was a secretary one time. I never had to travel for my boss.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard of a secretary having to travel for work. Have you?
I mean, depends on the secretary. Like government secretary, like Secretary of State, they travel all the time.
Yeah, this is secretary for a fake hydroponics business.
I mean, secretary could just be like right-hand man or woman.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So apparently this travel was cross-country. So Catherine was a single mom, and she left her child with her parents, who were rightfully very suspicious of John. And before she left, they warned her to be very careful. John promised Catherine that she was going to travel extensively. He promised her a new wardrobe. I mean, he promised her basically the world.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, the only promise that he came through with was the promise of an unfulfilled short life.
Mm.
She was reported missing on June 15th of 1987. John was questioned in this case as well. But just like in the case of Lisa, there was no evidence. So again, the case against him was dropped. In May of 1987, John turned himself in. Now, it's not for what you're thinking. He'd been found guilty on multiple different charges, from felony theft, multiple frauds, and parole violations. So John Edward is incarcerated from 1987 to 1993 at Western Missouri Correctional Facility, where he becomes friends with Beverly Bonner. She's 49 years old, and she's the prison librarian. So when John was released, now when I say befriended, add a little wink at the end of that.
Mhm.
He befriended Beverly.
Befriended.
He befriended.
Friended.
So when John is released in 1993, Beverly, his new friend, leaves her
Friend.
husband for John, and she
Huh.
moves to Kansas City to work for him at his hydroponics company, Equi Plus.
Yeah.
Well, here's the
All the
thing.
rage.
Oh yeah, I mean, haven't you purchased products from them before? Yeah. So
Yeah.
here's
The
the thing.
80s hydroponics, so big.
John and Beverly had actually met years earlier because they'd been employed at the same place in Kansas City. The job that Beverly accepted at John's company was basically heading up the company. Now he's changed the name and he's gone through some things because remember, he's been, in trouble for fraud and forgery and all this. So his new company is
Yeah. And he's good about changing names.
Yeah, right?
He's good at changing names and details. Yeah.
Exactly. So his new company is Hydroglow, and the company sold organic vegetables. Beverly packs up and she moves to Florida, where the company is headquartered. Beverly's husband, Dr. William Bonner, because they never divorced, she just left him, would occasionally receive a typewritten letter from Beverly as she traveled across the globe, and Beverly would tell him of her assignments in places such as Europe and Australia. William never really felt like he had a reason to doubt the letters and their authenticity, but he did find it a little unusual that Beverly didn't show up to their son's funeral, their son Randy, who died in 1995. William said he assumed she was tending to some important company business. I don't know how important that company business is, but if my kid is having a funeral, there is nothing more important. But then again, this is a woman who packed up and left her husband and kid. I don't know.
I mean, there may be some flawed priorities in the hierarchy of needs here.
Well, I'm just thinking, like, as him, I would think, hey, there's no more business more important than our children. But we also know John Edward has a history, and I'm sure you can kind of see where it's going.
It also feels like maybe the husband was like, she didn't show up, but she left me. So maybe this is better because I don't have to talk about it anymore.
Maybe. And that could have been his response. Like, I don't, she left me and I don't really care. I don't want to get into it. So
yeah,
he didn't really put much effort into it.
Because there was like, where is she? He's like, she got some business going on.
Yeah. But no one's seen Beverly in person since.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, with the mid to late 90s comes the internet, which John discovered immediately. So John would roam various sites under the username Slave Master, looking for women who enjoyed playing the submissive partner role during sex.
Mm-hmm.
In walks Sheila Faith in 1994. Sheila had lost her husband in 1991, and as a widow, she was still very lonely. She hadn't really gotten over it. And not only was she still grieving her husband, she had a daughter, and her 15-year-old daughter, Debbie, was wheelchair bound due to spina bifida. That is a malformation of the vertebrae in the spine that exposes the spinal column, and there is no cure for it. So
while in the womb, the baby's spine does not completely form.
Right. So once in a wheelchair, always in a wheelchair. She's always going to be confined to a wheelchair. Hopefully in the future, there's some medical miracles. So John portrays himself to Sheila as a wealthy man who wants to support both Sheila and Debbie. He promised to pay for Debbie's therapy, and he even offered to give Sheila a job. So Sheila fell in love with her shining white knight, and she told her friends that she and Debbie were moving in with them. The two moved from Fullerton, California to Kansas City with the help of John, and they're never heard from again. John's online popularity in the BDSM community grew. He flourished. And in 1999, John and Isabella Lewicka met, and Isabella, who was originally from Poland, moved to the United States with her family in 1993. John did what he does. He offered Isabella a job and a bondage relationship. So Isabella leaves her family in Indiana to move with John. John, who was still married to Nancy during all of this, we forgot about Nancy for a little bit, but they're still married. Gave an engagement ring to Isabella and took her down to the registrar's office and paid for a marriage license. It was never picked up. He paid for it. They never picked it up. Isabella was so proud of her newfound relationship. She called John her husband, whereas John would just tell people that Isabella was his cousin. Isabella was so serious about her relationship with John that she signed a 115 item slave contract that gave John complete control over every aspect of her life, including her bank accounts. Isabella would visit a bookstore called Robert Myers in Oakland Park, and she was such a frequent customer that they just considered her a regular. She walks in and they're like, "Hey, Isabella," and she would.
It's like the bookstore version of Norm.
Yeah, exactly, Isabella, or more like,
is it?
You know,
is it?
Well, they're probably whispering because it's a bookstore, so like Isabella.
That's right.
So she would have book chats with the owner, Robert. And in July of 1999, Isabella visited the bookstore with John this time. And she introduced him around the store as her husband while he purchased some items for her. And as they were about to leave, Isabella said to the owner, Robert, that they were moving and that she's like, "Hey, Robert, it's been real, but I'm not ever going to see you again because we're moving."
Yeah. Peace out.
She just kind of dropped it. Like it was like a mic drop, like boom. John told a web designer that worked for him that she was caught smoking marijuana and deported. And that's why she was never seen again.
So this would be the third or fourth lady who's just never seen again.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Conveniently, Isabella's parents receive a typewritten letter from Isabella describing to them her world travels. Right around the time that Isabella disappears, John meets Suzette Troughton. Suzette is a licensed practical nurse and was experienced in the BDSM scene, particularly in what is called Gorian parties or practices, which means becoming a slave to several masters. And the internet was her way to search out these masters. So in 1999, Suzette met a wealthy businessman from Kansas City named JR.
Huh.
I wonder who that could be.
I don't know. 2 and 2 makes 4.
Right. So Suzette and John correspond by email for several months. And you know what? Yeah, you guessed it. He offered her a job.
Guys got jobs like all over the place. We could use a guy like this now.
Man, if his employment rate was real, we'd be in good shape, right?
Yeah, just giving people jobs left and right. And you need a job. You need a job. You need a job. Everybody gets a job.
Well, Suzette was a nurse. So the job that he said he had for her was as a nurse for his diabetic father on a trip around the world. Suzette, of course, was intrigued by the offer, but she was like, I need to check you out a little bit. So before she accepted, she wanted to spend some time in Kansas City with JR and his father. So in October, John manages to convince some colleagues to pose as various family members in order to fool Suzette on her visit. After a 5-day visit to Kansas, Suzette agrees to accept the job. And on February 14th, she packs up and she moves to Kansas City to begin her new life. So for 2 weeks, Suzette rented an apartment on John's credit card because he told her that he had to, conclude some business deals before they could begin her new career and the trip. As a part of their sexual practices, the two would take photos during sessions and she would send them to her friend Crystal. Suzette goes missing March 1st of 2000, but the letters to Crystal keep coming. But the tone of the letters, the emails change. They don't talk about personal things between Suzette and Crystal anymore. And said they talk about how good life was and her amazing new job and her master. Also, all of her emails were signed Suze, which is a nickname that she never personally used for herself. Suzette's mother, Caroline, received a few letters, all typewritten from Suzette. The letters were supposedly mailed from places across the world that she traveled, but they were always postmarked from, where do you think, Adam?
I'm going to go with Kansas City.
Yes! Ding, ding, you got it. They were all
Kansas City for 500, Alex. Thank you.
So Suzette's mother said the letters were always mistake-free, which was unlike Suzette. So at the end of March, John called Suzette's mom and told her that they were severely disappointed in Suzette John told Carolyn that Suzette had run away from him and the job with a man she barely knew after stealing money from him, and that he hadn't seen or heard from her since.
That's convenient.
Fortunately for the women on the internet and law enforcement, John started to get cocky, which meant he was getting sloppy. So by 1999, his antics grabbed the attention of 2 different police departments in Kansas City and Missouri. John, who was a frequent occupant at the Extended Stay America Hotel, police found out that he stayed there on a pretty regular basis. And they were told that on his most recent stay of April 23rd, that the woman he was with, they only saw the woman one time, and it was while she was photocopying a document. The desk clerk managed to get a look at the document and was freaked out by it, completely horrified. It was a slave contract. The hotel notified the police about the document and the unnamed female. They had stayed for 5 days, after which John sent her back to Dallas. He told his slave to prepare to move to Kansas. Detective Jack Boyer of the Lenexa Police Department of Kansas told the hotel to contact him immediately if John returned. John's name began popping up more and more related to missing people investigations, because now police departments are starting to, connect and share information, where in the 70s they were not.
Mm-hmm.
So while searching for information about Suzette Troughton, authorities learned that she and John had stayed at the Guest House Motel in February. So they immediately search and they test the room the couple had stayed in, and they discovered blood. Unfortunately, they couldn't determine whose blood it was. So back in Dallas, the unnamed slave tried to contact John so that he could make good on his promises to her, but she was unable to reach him. He had taken several photographs of her in various compromising positions, including some in bondage, and she wanted those photos from him, but she was unable to reach him. So she reached out to the police. 2 officers from Lenexa reached out to speak to her after they were contacted by Dallas authorities. When the detectives heard the details of her story, they passed it along to the FBI. The FBI, dun, 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 already had a case file of their own on John. The investigation that they had included suspicion of prostitution and white slavery. So on May 19th of 2000, another complaint against John was filed by another slave. She's also unnamed in reports. John again stays at the extended stay in the same room. He liked the room 120. The unnamed slave told police that John repeatedly violated their safety guides. I guess the big thing about BDSM relationships is of course there's a big trust factor, but I guess there's also safety words and code words and things like that. I don't know. I've never even seen 50 Shades of Grey. This is just I'm going based on what I have researched in the past. Not researched,
from
just
what
heard.
From what I understand, there is a very outlined contract of what's going to happen, what's not going to happen, and what will happen if things cross lines. It's very clearly set up ahead of time, so there is no ambiguity.
Exactly. But John completely violated this time and time again. He had with her, as he previously had, taken photographs, and he beat her. And when she complained, he left. The Lenexa, Kansas PD and the FBI interviewed the unnamed slave. Deciding that John was a dangerous threat, authorities made a decision. All right, it's time to arrest him. So DA Paul Morris approved the arrest warrant. On June 2nd of 2000, it was a Friday morning, about 10:15 a.m., 2 police officers knocked on John's door and informed him that he was under arrest on the charges of aggravated assault against 2 women. Little did they know, they'd barely hit the tip of the iceberg. Nancy, his wife, was brought in for questioning, but she proved to be no help to the investigation. On June 3rd, a team of detectives and forensics gurus set up shop at John's farm in Lacine, Kansas, and it did not take long at all for cadaver dogs to locate 5 large metal barrels on the property.
Oh, always the metal barrels.
I was just going to say, what's with the metal barrels? So the first barrel reveals a naked, blindfolded and decomposing body in the fetal position. In the second barrel, there was another decomposing body. The bodies were autopsied by Dr. Ronald Hodgman. During the course of the weekend, search warrants were secured for 2 storage lockers that were owned by John Edward. On June 5th, which is a Monday, a group of investigators opened locker E2 and found 3 more barrels inside. Each barrel was marked rendered pork fat. Kevin Weiner with the Kansas City PD Crime Lab opened the first barrel, and inside he found a shoe with a leg still attached.
It's not how shoes are supposed to come.
No, they're not. Detective Weiner resealed the barrel, and all 3 of the barrels were sent to Jackson County for autopsy, which was performed by Dr. Thomas Young. Missouri DA Chris Koster had a press conference and announced that each of the 3 barrels found in the storage locker contained a female body. One of the bodies was identified as Suzette Troughton, who had been missing since March 1st. Days later, on June 2nd, Beverly Bonner, the second body, was identified. On June 13th, John Robinson was charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder for the bodies found in both Kansas and Missouri. Both states would go on to pursue death penalty charges. In Johnson County District Court, he was charged with 2 counts of murder for the deaths of Suzette and Isabella, along with additional charges of aggravated kidnapping of Suzette. In Cass County in Missouri, John was charged with the murders of Beverly Bonner and the 2 more still unidentified bodies in the storage locker. Both bodies were later identified by dental records as Sheila and Debbie Faith, the mother and daughter. On July 28th of 2000, additional charges against John were brought when he was charged with the murder of Lisa Stassi, who disappeared in 1985. Remember, the second woman that he's responsible for killing. And also aggravated interference with parental custody in the case of Heather Tiffany Robinson, aka Tiffany Stassi, his niece. John Edward Robinson was sentenced to death in Kansas in 2002 for the murders of Suzette and Isabella, and also received life in prison for the murder of Lisa Stassi. The life sentence was as a result of her murder happening before Kansas reinstated the death penalty. In Missouri, prosecutors actively pursued additional charges based on evidence that was discovered in the state. Missouri wanted to extradite him, but his attorneys opposed because of Missouri had much more harsh sentencing, and they were much more aggressive in capital punishment cases. So DA Chris Koster of Missouri offered a plea, but insisted that as a condition of any plea deal that John would have to lead authorities to the bodies of Lisa Stassi, Paula Godfrey, and Catherine Clampett. In doing so, it would have implied guilt in Kansas and probably could have been used against him, so he declined. So it became clear without John's help, the women's remains would not be found. So DA Costa reached a compromise. In an extremely well-scripted plea in October of 2003, John Edward Robinson acknowledged that DA Costa had enough evidence to convict him of capital murder for the deaths of Paula Godfrey, Catherine Clampett, Beverly Bonner, and Debbie and Sheila Faith. The statement, while technically a guilty plea, worked in Missouri, but since there was no implicit admission, it held no bearing in Kansas. So in 2005, Nancy Robinson filed for divorce after 41 years of marriage. She cited irreconcilable differences and incompatibility. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I feel like that has to be a pretty open and shut case.
Yeah, pretty much. In 2006, Heather Robinson, aka Tiffany Stassi, filed a civil suit against Truman Medical Center in Kansas City and her social worker, Karen Gaddis, saying that Karen told John about Lisa and Tiffany when he was looking for underprivileged women for his, quote, home for unwed mothers of white babies. The hospital and Heather reached a settlement in 2007 for an undisclosed sum, and Heather promised her biological grandmother, Patricia Sylvester, a share of the money. In 2001, a book was released called The Internet Slave Master that covered John's life up to the trial. A second book was written about him called Anyone You Want Me to Be, a true story of sex and death on the internet. And it was written by FBI profiler John Douglas, who, if you've ever watched Mindhunter, you know that the FBI profilers and like the BAU, the Behavioral Analysis Unit, was like started by him.
Oh.
It was also author Stephen Sinclair. A third book called Depraved by John Glatt was released in 2001, and it was a detailed description of the lives affected by John Edward Robinson's crimes. Cold Case on A&E also featured John's case, as did Investigation Discovery's FBI Criminal Pursuit, Sins and Secrets. Vanity Fair Confidential, It Takes a Killer, and Deadly Doctors, also Forensic Files, and The New Detectives on Discovery Channel. There you go. John Edward Robinson, who is
he's prolific. That is,
oh man.
And that he was still married for 41 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, I have questions about, come on.
As of 2019, he remains on death row in Kansas.
Like, death row is not a quick experience. Like, they like you to know you're going to die for a long time before they put you to death.
Well, you know what? Shouldn't have been killing all those people. Should have stuck with the forgery and the embezzlement. How about that?
Yeah. Like, how do you go from forgery to and embezzlement to, like,
straight up murder
and, like, slave mastering?
And, like, if you see his picture, and it will be on our website, like, he just looks like a creepy dude. He really does. He looks like a creep. Like, if he offered me a job, I'd be like, nah, I'm good.
Right, but in a bad economy, people are like, "Hey, tell me."
I'll eat ramen noodles. I'll eat ramen noodles, and I can't have gluten. That's how much I would not take that job.
Fair enough. That is a very specific, personalized reason not to. Like that was both like full disclosure and also like, wow, this is how much she would not take that job.
That's how much I would not take
I'm impressed.
But there you go.
Yeah.
That is the story of the internet's first serial killer.
Hey guys, I'm Kelsey.
And I'm Taylor, and we are convinced that if you guys are listening and loving this podcast, that you will love our podcast, Morning Mugshot. It's a true crime podcast where we cover a new case every Friday. And at the end of our episode, we talk about our thoughts, feelings, and opinions on this week's case. If you guys want to come and be our new besties, we can't wait to hear your thoughts, feelings, and opinions on our cases. So feel free to check us out, Morning Mugshot, on Instagram and anywhere you get your true crime podcast.
All right, now it is time for the A side, and this week has been weird for me. It's been weird for everybody.
Not just for you, yeah.
No, it's been weird for everybody. Like, we record these on Wednesday, obviously, and then it's released on Friday. But in the last few days, like Friday of last week was a full moon, and then Saturday was a blue moon, and also Halloween, and then Sunday was daylight savings time, and then for me, Monday was a anniversary of a thing that happened, and now Tuesday was an election. And so every day has had a lot of stuff, and I've been really searching for an escape and trying to find, something to hold on to get through this just sort of weird time. And then somebody goes and dies.
Oh no.
And not someone that I knew personally, but somebody that I was a huge fan of. And then that gets me thinking about all the things that they had done. So in this last few days of just international change and big events and the moon doing its thing and time suddenly rolling backwards for 1 hour, Sean Connery passed away. And
Bond.
James Bond, and so much more. And I started thinking, like, of all the things that I had seen him in, and also how I understood the role of Bond. And it kind of clicked because last week we talked about Sherlock Holmes, where you've had hundreds of actors play this iconic role. But for the role of Bond, over the last 70 years, there's only been 6 dudes that have played the role.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of amazing. So Sean Connery in and of himself could be an entire episode. I knew him as Bond, but I will never forget him in Highlander or as Indiana Jones' father or in The Rock, which is a highly underrated movie. I was so excited to see League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and that movie got such bad ratings that Sean Connery stopped acting. Like that was his last movie.
Is that really?
Yeah. It went so badly, and it was such incredible source material. It's based on a graphic novel by Alan Moore, and it should have been perfect. But the American studio tried to Americanize it and make it an action movie when it was really more of a mystery, and it was never supposed to be the movie it became. And that was, from everything I've read, the reason he stopped acting. And it breaks my heart because it was a great graphic novel and he was the perfect person to play the lead character. And it could have been so good, but it never should have been a blockbuster movie. It should have been a HBO series, and it would have been so much better.
HBO does it right.
They do. And it breaks my heart a little bit that it went so badly that he stopped acting. But when I thought about Sean Connery, and then he has been so good in so many things. I mean, there are movies that aren't action movies, like Finding Forrester, where he's quite good. And I mean, The Untouchables, like he has an entire career. But I started to think about my very complicated relationship with James Bond. And that comes back more to, I talked with my folks today, and my dad remembers going to the theater to see Dr. No way back when it came out. But for me, I experienced James Bond because of TBS and TNT and all of these cable networks that would buy these old movies and just play them all the time. That's where I first saw James Bond. And then I was in this weird sort of donut hole of adolescence and James Bond movies. So Timothy Dalton was the 80s James Bond. He had two movies. One came out in 87, 86. One came out in 89. And then nothing really happened until 1995, when the James Bond of my adolescence existed. And that was Pierce Brosnan. GoldenEye, which turned into, for my generation, more than just a movie. It also spawned, quite frankly, the greatest multiplayer video game ever. And without the multiplayer mode on GoldenEye on the N64, we wouldn't have Call of Duty. We wouldn't have League of Legends, or even what's the other one with everyone runs around? Not Kickstarter. Oh God, I feel so old right now. Oh my goodness. So it's any game where you have a bunch of people playing and they're all fighting each other and trying to see who wins. That's all based on GoldenEye. Oh my goodness. I'm actually gonna look this up. I can't believe my brain is not working right now. Because all I can keep saying is Kickstarter, and it's not Kickstarter. It's like the most popular game in the world right now, and has been for years, and people will watch
Call of Duty,
but then this is the one where you can build stuff and you all drop in the same.
Is it the one where they
dance? Yeah, the dancing one. Fortnite. Holy mother of biscuit. Oh my goodness. I'm so old. I couldn't remember Fortnite. So Fortnite doesn't exist without GoldenEye. And GoldenEye was the first multiplayer. We're all in the same place. We're trying to kill each other and somebody's going to win. It was amazing. And Pierce Brosnan was amazing. But it started making me think about Bond and how sort of that character has evolved and changed over the years. And so I started to do a little research because I was like, okay, obviously the older Bond ones with, Sean Connery and Roger Moore and even George Lazenby, they were definitely way more violent, right? Because like it was very silly. Now the new ones are more nuanced.
Yeah.
And no, it turns out that the Bond who kills the most people per movie,
Daniel Craig, isn't it?
no, Pierce
Huh?
Brosnan.
Oh.
Like he is the most violent of Bonds. Daniel Craig is actually on the low end.
Oh, wow.
Like his movies are much more like, so I have seen there are 24 Bond movies and I have seen at least 20. I don't remember all of the Timothy Dalton ones. The Roger Moore ones are mostly forgettable, but so it's hard because he did 7. So it's like, did I see that or did I sleep through it? I don't know. But one of my favorites has always been the George Lazenby's On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And because it was an entirely different style of Bond. It was serious. He gets married. His wife dies. It is sad. It is intense. Like you all start to understand, like, why is this guy seemingly a psychopath? Oh, because the main bad guy who's been haunting him for years literally waited until he got married and then shot his wife. Okay, this is gonna give some background to his psychosis. And the Daniel Craig movies much better fit that George Lazenby on Her Majesty's Secret Service style, where this is a very tortured man. Like Sean Connery never seems tortured. He kind of seems like he's having fun. He's having fun with it. Like
he's cool.
He's going through this. Yeah, he's cool. He's smooth. Roger Moore is like the weird uncle, but like it's working. Like he's always like Roger Moore actually kisses more women in Bond movies than anybody else, which I guess it was the 70s and 80s, so like late 70s, 80s, so that was okay.
Mhm.
But evidently he's the biggest ladies man. Only thing that Daniel Craig does better than any other Bond is drive fast. Like his cars go super fast and he drives like a maniac. Pierce Brosnan is the Bond that kills the most people, which is very weird.
Mhm.
And then Sean Connery, in sort of a classic Sean Connery moment, his movies, because he was the first, and the first movie was made for like pennies. Not pennies, but comparative pennies.
Right.
The return on investment for the first Bond movie was 2,469%.
Wow.
So Pierce Brosnan is the least return on investment, and he only made 259% on every versus the budget versus all of his movies, whereas Sean Connery made 2,000+% on what he was paid.
Shoo.
Sean Connery was also so good that Ian Fleming, who is the writer who wrote all of the James Bond novels, wrote after he saw Sean Connery play James Bond, he changed the origin of the character to having a Scottish background.
Oh, wow.
He was like, okay, this guy is so good. I'm going to write this into the character. And the name James Bond was Ian Fleming's orthodontist. He picked it because he was like, this is the most nondescript, not exciting name ever. And the family evidently got a kick out of it because they were like, okay, cool, whatever. Like, this is funny. We'll tell everybody this at like cocktail parties. And then Ian Fleming felt bad, kind of. And he wrote them and he said, hey, whatever you guys want to do, you could always use the name Ian Fleming in any way you want. Because I kind of stole your dad's name. So your family can use my name whenever you want to. And you could write it in anything. And I'm never gonna be upset.
But upset by what? That's a cool thing.
Yeah, it is. But, some people don't. Like, I can imagine every time somebody went to that orthodontist, they were like, "Oh, Bond, huh? James Bond." And the orthodontist is like, "Yeah, no, that was actually me. It's cool, but that's fine, whatever.
That was me
Please sit down in
first.
the chair." And it was me first. That's where it came from. You should probably pay me more money. So, of the 24 films, and this is also interesting because the 25th film has now been delayed 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
It was supposed to come out last spring. It was supposed to come out this October. Now they're saying it's going to be next spring. This is probably the last Bond film with Daniel Craig. It will be his 5th one, which will put him past Pierce Brosnan, but still behind Connery and Roger Moore in terms of times playing Bond. It has seemingly an incredible villain, Rami Malek, who is a just over the moon actor. He won an Oscar for his portrayal of Freddie Mercury. His work in Mr. Robot is amazing. He's also the Pharaoh from both of the Night of the Museum movies.
Yes.
So, like, the man has range. And they tried so hard to make him not look adorable. They gave him like prosthetic, like, so he has like a scarred face, but he still looks adorable. So it's going to be really hard. Like, we're supposed to hate him, but I don't know if we're going to be able to. And so it's been delayed, but it was supposed to come out again, like basically before Thanksgiving was supposed to be the next Bond movie. So of all the Bond movies, the most money that any of them has made officially was Skyfall in 2012, and it made worldwide $1 billion.
Mm-hmm.
But people have looked back and said, adjusting for inflation, that if you go all the way back to Thunderbolt in 1965, the amount of money that it made then, if you adjust for inflation, would have been well over $1 million. So even as this franchise has been around for going on 70 years now, 60, 70 years, and the most famous of all Bonds, Sean Connery, has recently left us, the most profitable film, adjusted for inflation, of the entire series, after 24 movies, soon to be 25, with 6 different actors, was the 3rd movie they ever did, Thunderbolt, in 1965. And if there's anything that can speak to the timelessness of the character, but also the timelessness of how Sean Connery portrayed him, like, I feel like if you randomly polled, like, you walked down the street and you were like, hey, who's the first person you think of as James Bond? Most people are going to say Sean Connery. And maybe that's a bit of hopefulness on my part, because he hasn't done a Bond movie in 40 years. But he was the most iconic, he was the most profitable, and he's the only one who has ever really had a career outside of Bond of all the actors. So this is not.
Now, don't you go knocking Daniel Craig's performance in Knives Out.
No, that was no, seriously. Knives Out was my second favorite movie of 2019. It was an amazing film. I've watched it as a comfort thing several times during COVID, because you cannot watch Jojo Rabbit as a comfort movie because it's not comforting. But that's why it was the best.
No, but there are
movie
some
of
funny
last year.
parts in it.
Oh, Jojo Rabbit's amazing. There's some very funny parts, but it's also not the type of thing of like, well, I can't sleep tonight, so let's turn on a movie about Nazis.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's rough. But Daniel Craig has had a very good career. Pierce Brosnan has had a good career. Timothy Dalton got paid. Roger Moore did some other stuff, but no one ever has had the success after Bond like Sean Connery. And if you have never watched the Bond Sean Connerys, or the Sean Connery Bonds, either way, six of one, half dozen of the other.
Yep.
I highly recommend that you step back and you watch them. It's going to get misogynist. You got to know that going in. Like, you know, like it's going to be sexist. It's going to be a lot of unprotected sex.
Time.
It was a very different time. But it also, every time you watch those movies, you'll be like, wait, I know this theme from every other movie I've seen before or since about action movies and spies. Or here's this thing that I thought was part of this movie, but no, it's just an homage back to another movie that I've seen before. And I hope that some people will look at Sean Connery's catalog and watch more Bond movies and appreciate them for their time period and what they are. It sucks that it takes something like someone passing to have that happen. But if the only Bond you know has been the one, like me, like I only knew Bond pretty much as Pierce Brosnan because that's when I went to the movie theater as a kid. But I learned about Sean Connery and Roger Moore, even George Lazenby, through cable TV, which thank God, because without that, I probably would have missed a lot. I highly recommend that maybe in this time period we're turning to where it's a little bit colder outside and we can't do all the things we want to do and we have a little bit of extra time and we're looking for things to binge or things to look at, go back and watch Dr. No or Thunderbolt or one of the early Sean Connery James Bond movies and go in with open eyes knowing it's going to be weird, it's going to be sexist, misogynist, it'll be a different time, but also go in with open eyes knowing that this is the seeds of an entire genre of movie that without these moments, which quite frankly weren't supposed to happen because no one thought this was going to work, we wouldn't have so many of the movies that we've had for the last 40 years. So as we remember Sean Connery, go watch The Rock. Welcome to The Rock. It's a great line. Never, like, I've said that to people and no one understands what I'm saying. I've quoted that and people are like, okay, this isn't a rock. And you're like, okay, fine. All right, fine. You missed Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade is arguably the best Indiana Jones period because of his and Harrison Ford's interactions. But if you really have never seen a true Sean Connery James Bond movie, please go and watch one of them soon, because I think you'll be delighted, you'll giggle, you'll guffaw, you'll probably be a little bit annoyed.
Wow, you said guffaw.
I did, yeah. You know, I worked it into my podcast so it could cross it off the word of the day list. So
gotcha.
Yeah, you know, I like crossing things off lists. But yeah, go Sean Connery's got a lot of stories in the last couple of days since he passed, but if you've never seen him in his true iconic role, please do so. And if you watch League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, read the graphic novel by Alan Moore and you'll understand how good that could have been. And don't blame Sean Connery for it not being good.
All right.
This is Kevin Armstrong, your host for Movie Battle. Each episode, we take two films and put a superfan of each against one another to decide which one is best. The only rule we have is that you come correct. If you're interested in being a guest on Movie Battle, please check us out on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter.
Before we wrap it up, just want to say again, thank you for coming along with us on this incredible journey, because each week we both look forward to it. And it's just been so much fun for us. And you can check out our website. It's asidebsidepodcast.square.site. Brand new site. It's been up less than a month. New merch, holiday stuff coming up by the time this podcast is out. Also, because my mom wanted something a little less murdery, we got a different sweatshirt that's going to be out there, plus some holiday stuff. Again, Adam, something, as soon as you see it, you'll know it's for you.
Yay.
And
Also, I love that your mom requested something a little less murdery.
Right.
Not completely not murdery, but just like less murder.
A little less blood, so I don't feel bad wearing it. Not completely not murdery, just not bloody.
Yeah, just less murdery. Like, we didn't plan this murder. It's more of a crime of passion. It's like, can we go from felony murder to manslaughter?
We would love it 100% if you would follow us on Facebook, like our Instagram, subscribe on Spotify, Apple, give us a rating, give us a review. We would love it. And thank you so much.
And I think one of the coolest things about this week is that the B-side was prompted by people's responses.
I know, it was so much fun to put that out there and get the feedback. So we'll do that again soon. Of course, since I put 3 out there, I got the next lineup for the next week. Next week we'll have the Socialite Slayer. But man, thank you so much. It's so cool. Like, I got so excited when everybody was like responding, and I got DMs, I got replies, I got text messages. It was so much fun. So thank you.
Yeah. So keep that coming. Like, if you have a story, or I know like true crime is definitely gets more responses, but like if you have a movie that you are like, hey Adam, do you remember this movie? Or like, hey, what about this TV show? Like, Wings was great. Why don't you talk about that ever, dude? And I'd be like, you're right. I should talk about Wings more.
I did like Wings.
So Wings is great. It really is good. We could do an entire episode of Wings.
Mhm.
So if you have a true crime story or something about media that you want to hear us talk about, it makes it that much more exciting when there's that little bit of connection. So don't hesitate to send us your ideas, your complaints, your comments. I mean, if you want to compose a song, we're not going to say no.
Not at all. All right. You can email us too, A-side, B-side podcasts with an S @gmail.com. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah. Thank you, Brooke.